There is a particular kind of silence that doesn't feel like peace. It feels like a door that won't open, like a phone that never rings, like months becoming years and the years carrying no answer. Just more waiting, more wondering, more of the same ache you've been bringing to the same prayer for longer than you can remember. Most of us know this silence. Some of us are living inside it right now. And the thing about this kind of silence is that it doesn't stay neutral. The longer it lasts, the more it starts to feel like something. Not just quiet, but like evidence. Evidence that you've been overlooked, that you matter less than you thought, that the God who moved mountains in the stories you've read is somehow not moving in yours. We don't say it out loud, usually, but somewhere underneath the faith we carry in public is a quieter thought. Maybe I've been forgotten. This is the story of four people who had every reason to believe exactly that, and what they found on the other side of the silence. Job was a man the Bible describes in terms reserved for almost no one else. Not merely good, blameless. Not merely religious, the finest human being of his entire generation. And then everything was taken: his children, his wealth, his health. Gone in events so sudden and so total that the only honest word for what happened is catastrophe. And then silence. Job cried out. He argued. He questioned. He pushed back with a directness that still unsettles people who read it today. He wasn't politely suffering. He wasn't performing quiet acceptance. He demanded a response. He said, in effect, I want to speak to whoever is responsible for this, and I want an answer. For chapter after chapter, nothing came back. What Job could not see from inside the furnace was that his questions, the raw, unfiltered, furious questions of a man who felt completely abandoned, were being heard, were being kept, were, in ways he had no access to, becoming part of something larger than his own suffering. Job's silence was not abandonment. It was the condition under which something unprecedented was allowed to happen. The silence was not empty. It only looked that way from inside. Joseph was 17 years old when his brothers sold him, not abandoned by strangers, by family, the people who were supposed to protect him. And then the years in Egypt, first as a slave in a foreign household, then as a prisoner for a crime he didn't commit. Year after year in the dark. No rescue coming, no divine intervention, no voice from heaven saying, I'm still here. I haven't forgotten you. Just silence. Just the slow erosion of everything he thought he knew about God's protection. What Joseph couldn't see from the prison cell was that every year of slavery was training him. Every humiliation was teaching him something about leadership that comfort never could have. Every experience was preparing him for a moment that would change the history of nations. But in the silence, he couldn't see that. All he knew was that he'd been sold by his family and abandoned by his God. Esther's entire identity was hidden. A Jewish girl in a Persian palace, her people had no rights, no voice, no protection. She was hidden from the king except when he demanded her presence. She was powerless. And through years of being in that position, she said nothing about her heritage. The Bible records, God's name is never mentioned in the book of Esther. Not once. The entire story unfolds without a single direct statement that God is involved. It's a book about a hidden girl in a hidden position during a hidden crisis where God's involvement is completely invisible. But that hidden position, the very thing that seemed like powerlessness, became her greatest strength. She was positioned exactly where she needed to be at exactly the moment she was needed. Her silence had placed her in a position to save her entire people. Hannah waited. She prayed the same prayer year after year. Every festival, every family gathering, every time she saw other women with children, the prayer came again. And year after year, Silence. Not an explanation. Not a not yet. Not even the comfort of knowing someone heard. Just silence and the slow accumulation of grief. But in that silence, she was being transformed. She was becoming someone who understood needs so deeply, understood asking so completely, that when she finally received her answer, she could respond with a generosity most people would call impossible. Job, Joseph, Esther, Hannah. 4 different stories, 4 different kinds of silence. But there's a pattern here that changes everything. In each case, the silence was not proof of absence. It was the condition in which invisible work happened. Job's silence refined his faith, not destroyed it, refined it. By the end, he wasn't angry anymore. He was awed. He understood that the world was larger and more complex than he'd imagined, and that God was in that complexity in ways beyond his comprehension. Joseph's silence became his credential. When he finally stood before Pharaoh, he wasn't standing there as a slave who'd been rescued. He was standing there as someone who understood suffering, understood exile, understood the human capacity for both cruelty and redemption. That understanding made him trustworthy. It made him wise beyond his years. Esther's silence gave her a voice that mattered more than any obvious position of power could have. Her hidden position meant that when she finally spoke, it was for something that transcended her own safety. Hannah's silence transformed her. She became someone who could receive a miracle and then give that miracle back. She became someone who understood the cost of answered prayer. Do you see what happened? In the silence, they weren't forgotten. They were being prepared. God wasn't absent. God was working in ways they couldn't see, building things that would only be visible years later. And this is the pattern the Bible shows us again and again. The wilderness is not punishment, it's preparation. The delay is not rejection, it's refinement. The silence is not abandonment, it's the condition in which invisible work happens. Sometimes that work is about changing you. Sometimes it's about positioning you. Sometimes it's about teaching you something you couldn't learn any other way. But the silence itself, the silence that feels like proof that God has turned away, is often the exact moment when God is working most deeply. I know this doesn't make the silence feel less painful. I know that understanding this intellectually doesn't stop the ache of not hearing from God. It doesn't speed up the answer. It doesn't make the waiting easier. But it changes what the silence means. Instead of being evidence that you're forgotten, it becomes evidence that something is being formed. Instead of proof that God has given up on you, it becomes the condition in which you're being prepared for something you can't yet see. What if your silence isn't about God's absence? What if it's about invisible work? What if the very thing that feels like abandonment is actually the crucible where something important is being shaped? Job discovered that his suffering had refined him. Joseph discovered that his years in darkness had prepared him. Esther discovered that her hidden position had positioned her perfectly. Hannah discovered that her waiting had made her capable of a generosity that changed generations. What might your silence be preparing? What might God be building in you that you won't see until years from now? The silence doesn't feel good, but it's not what it seems. You're not forgotten. You're being formed.